Okay, I prune these tomatoes every week, and it's quite easy to do. It just takes time. You go to anywhere there's a leaf comes out, there's a little crotch between the main stem and that leaf, and you just use the pruning shears and snip that little new growth off. I also go around and prune things from the lower part of the tomato stalk, like dead trusses or trusses that were all the tomatoes already harvested. And it seems like tomatoes continually keep producing new sprouts, even out of areas that are completely trimmed off, so you just have to keep after trimming all the time. We did plant marigolds with the intention to help with disease control. For most of the summer you really could hardly see the marigolds, but now that the tomatoes are dying back, why, the marigolds are finally getting a chance to bloom. Okay, the reason we prune is because several reasons. First of all, if you prune a lot of the extra growth off, you will get fewer tomatoes, but they will be nicer and bigger, the ones that you do get. And also it allows the air to be able to circulate around the plant much better and keeps it more disease free. We're growing these organically, so the only thing we're doing is, so we sprayed them about once a week with a product called Oxidate, which is essentially hydrogen peroxide, and that was to control funguses and diseases on the leaves. We also sprayed a few times with a product called BT, and that was for worms. We did end up with hornworms at one point. They never got real bad. I discovered that if you leave the hornworms that have the little white pupa sticking out of their back, that is actually the pupa of a parasitic wasp, and the wasps will hatch out and take care of the rest of the hornworms for you, which seemed to work very well in our case. But we did get some fruit worms and things that the BT helped with. We really did not have much other disease until about 2-3 weeks ago. It's been a very, very wet summer here, and it was just so humid in here, foggy even, and one morning I came out and I could tell most of the leaves had some sort of a blight. Now we've sprayed, and it seems like the new growth is doing okay, but I think the season is almost over too. We're probably going to get frost here in the next week, but we'll see.
Well, there's some disease here. You can see the dark speckles here. Sometimes tomato leaves will simply curl because of a moisture issue. They get, too little. It helps protect them.
But that's probably not what's going on here, where the top leaves look fine.
Right.
Okay, a couple of the varieties that we grew are Sun Gold, which I think this was my favorite. It's a very golden, orangish colored little cherry. We also had, I think these were called Yellow Minis, which is another little yellow tomato. I thought these were some of the most interesting in their coloration. They're called Indigo Cherry Drops, and they have sort of an indigo color on top, and when they get ripe they're red on the bottom, but before they're ripe they're green with this purple top. Kind of remind me of plums when they're hanging here. This very interesting one, actually it's called an artisan tomato, is called Pink Bumblebee. Has little stripes in it and sort of a pinkish color. And another artisan one that I grew is this long one that is green when it's ready, when it's ripe. Gets a little bit of a rosy blush, a little bit of red lines, but that one made the mix that I sold very pretty with that green color in there. They were a little harder to pick though, because it was difficult to tell when they were ripe. in my heirloom tomatoes, this was the tomato that I grew to be a black one. It's called Black Prince, and it isn't really black inside, but it's dark. I also had a red tomato, which is called something like Moskvich. Not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And this yellow one is called Valencia. This big one was one of my favorites too. It is called German Striped, and the bottom is has red stripes on it, though it's mostly yellow. And I like this one very well too. This is called Green Cherokee. That one's probably not fully ripe, but it's mostly green even when it's ripe, with a little bit of a yellowish cast to the skin. Okay, and I believe this is my pink one called Rose. There's a big hole in it. And this was a white one that I grew called Great White. Now you can probably see the splits on these black prints. I had probably more trouble with these black prints splitting than any of my other varieties. That's supposed to be caused by irregular watering. So you want to keep your watering fairly even, so they're not getting a whole lot and then not getting any for a while. But these just seem to split more easily for me than some of the others, no matter what I did, and I'm sure I have some things to learn about that yet. Okay, now here's a tomato that has a hole. I'm not sure with this one if it split first and then a worm got in there, or if a bird came in the end of the house and pecked at it. I know that I've seen some of that happening. But yes, I did lose some tomatoes to worms and birds, and couldn't send to market those that were not looking real nice. Though we are still very inexperienced at this, I think having them covered did protect them from a lot of blight that they would have otherwise gotten. This was just a very unusual season with lots and lots of moisture, and we may have gone a little bit of a long stretch over the time that we got this blight between our sprayings, because my husband was away for a little while and he does most of the spraying. So I'm not quite sure why we ended up with some blight, but overall our tomatoes were pretty healthy all summer.
One of the questions that might come up is, why do we get blight like we see here on the tomatoes? It is controlled to some degree by not letting the rain splash ground dirt up on the tomatoes and thus contaminate them. Hence the hoop house helps prevent that ground splashing. We did not spray as regularly as we should, and there was like a 2-week period where I did not spray the oxidate on the tomatoes, and we developed blight shortly after that. But in balance throughout the whole region, counties around us, there was widespread tomato blight, early and late blight, and so forth. This is a common experience with tomatoes, even in those tomatoes that are bred to resist these things. Heirloom varieties tend to be, sometimes they're more resistant to some of the diseases, sometimes they're considerably less resistant, and hence that's why the commercial growers use that grow for, let's say, the common commercial market. They use tomatoes and other plant varieties that are bred to be resistant to some of the diseases to help control some of those problems. Our controls were the use of oxidate, the use of the hoop house as a rain shelter to prevent ground splashing. while this tomato has a split in the skin right here, let's ignore that for a moment. Let's look at this feature here. See this sort of a grayish ring around here, and the tomato flesh goes involuted there. This phenomena is called catfacing. It's not really a problem. It's not so much a disease. It seems to be related mostly to the types of tomatoes that have close blossom, and the fruit of the blossoms, the two different blossoms will grow together. It's like the tomato is trying to maybe twin, but it doesn't get it completely separated. I can show you some more catfacing on some green tomatoes, and you can sort of see what's going on. You'll also notice that around where the stem was, there's sometimes radial lines of darker flesh. It might be splits, it just might be just some of the feature of the tomato. Now these things, for let's say what has become the current commercial market for the United States, these tend to become blemishes that makes the tomato unsellable or less sellable. But one of the reasons we're growing our own tomatoes is because we can control what goes into them and understand what's coming out of them. With a little bit of paring knife work, you can cut this ring off, you can cut the core out here, and some of these things here, this becomes a very fine tomato, absent these things, or even with them if you're into that, for slicing or for cutting up for canning and so forth. These types of things do not destroy the value of the tomato. They just maybe make it less marketable depending on what your market is. Obviously the cracks, like the fissures like this, are actual breaks in the skin into the moist interior, and you can get increased mold and spoilage there. So these are probable market eliminators. For example, the restaurants that our broker sells to does not want split tomatoes. This is a tomato, probably from a single blossom, but you see how the tomato itself is twinned. If we flex this up here, you can see that the separation is pretty near complete. These appear to be two completely different fruit. We can see a green one here. It's rounded on one side, but it's sort of constricted on the other side. And you can see underneath here how the cat-facing features is starting to show up. There's a couple more down here that, again, this is a very mild amount of cat-facing. Sometimes you don't see any of this at all. Again, the cat-facing is something that we would just trim out and use the rest of the flesh of the tomato. This cat-facing phenomena seems to be related largely to larger tomatoes, the beefsteak style tomatoes. I have actually seen it in the hybridized tomatoes, but it seems that it happens more often with heirlooms, and especially with certain types of heirlooms seem to be more prone to it. Some people have argued that it's an issue of nutrition or water or things like that, but I tend to suspect it's partly related to genetics as well. Again, cat-facing is maybe an aesthetic issue. It's certainly not a quality of nutrition issue. Well, you're looking through our tool shed, which is just sort of a small hoop house with open ends that keeps the rain off of things. We can keep our tools there. And you'll see the blue hose there and here, and you see one of our garden hoses laying in the path between. On the floor, on the dirt here, you see a lot of wood chip mulch. Tree trimmers in our area dump their tree trimmings at a farm near us. We are able to go, and for free in this case, load up all the wood chips we want off of the big pile that he has accumulated in his ground. So we use wood chips as a mulch between our paths and on our main areas. Down here you can see the water hose. This is our irrigation setup. We've been using a drip line irrigation for 16 or more years. We went ahead and continued using that when we put in this greenhouse. This is an 1.5-inch piece of hose. It's sort of a canvas, a rubberized or plasticized canvas. We puncture into the hose with a special tool and insert these valves which have a nipple in the end that we put our drip tape on. When we replaced all of our hosing in our garden, we went ahead and set up what our garden rows were going to be, the spacing between the rows. And so that we'd have flexibility for crop rotations and things, we went ahead and put 3 drip tape taps at each row place. We've elected to concentrate on wide bed gardenings as opposed to individual rows. What this lets us do is with this valve we can turn on or off individual hoses, drip lines. The drip line is interesting as it's a thin, flexible piece of plastic, and every so often there is a very tiny hole in it that water under low pressure drips out. The far end of the hose is at the other end of the row. To close it off, we simply take and tie a single knot in the hose, and that's sufficient to seal up the end of the hose. So as you can see, our drip tapes, as they're called, they're a piece of plastic with holes and the water weeps out. We run them on top of the compost that forms our bed. My personal preference would be to slightly cover them in the compost. Running them above the ground is my wife's preference. It works out well. Water, in this case, the hose has emitters about every 8 inches that little tiny droplets form and drip out one at a time. Keeping all the water at ground level without it spraying up prevents the wetting of the leaves and the splashing of ground dirt with the water up onto the plants. This is different than watering overhead or having rain come down on the plants and hit the ground and bounce up. It just helps keep, first of all, to some degree, the fruit cleaner, and second of all, it helps prevent the transfer of the ground-borne disease up onto the leaf. Okay, you can see up at that end of the garden our hose goes into our grass. It crosses this grass expanse, and then we have an underground hydrant, a free spirit hydrant over there that's hooked to. Part of the success or the requirement for this drip tape system is that you should filter your water. So we have the water come from that hydrant through a valve. We can turn all the water to the bright large blue tubes on and off with this valve. Water flows through here through a filter. Clean the filter as it gets dirtied. Sediment in there is really what you want to filter out. Little tiny particles of dirt or sand will tend to clog the pores in that drip tubing. The next thing that's in line is a pressure reducer. On our well system, the water being pumped from our house up the hill to our garden, we end up with about 50 psi, 40 to 50 psi in the pressure line, in the water line. We have a pressure reducer. 20 psi is what this pressure reducer limits it to, and the pressure reducers also have a flow rate. In this case, this pressure reducer will flow up to 20 gallons a minute. That amount of flow, but reducing the pressure that much, lets us water multiple rows of crops simultaneously. We can sometimes have about half of our garden running water through the drip tape without any water problems.
Hi folks, Ariel over here. Thanks for spending some of your valuable time watching these videos. Hopefully you found something beautiful, educational, interesting, peaceful, relaxing, or useful while you were here. If so, find more videos here, subscribe so you don't miss any updates, and if you like what you found here, feel free to like and share away so that others can benefit as well. You all have a wonderful day.